Proud to join my colleague, Senator Landrieu, in introducing today this Restore the Gulf Coast Act of 2011. And I want to also thank her and compliment her on her leadership on the issue. Mary's been developing this legislation tirelessly since the tragedy, working with many others who will soon be co-sponsors, we hope, in this effort. Also want to recognize Congressman Steve Scalise and his Louisiana House colleagues for having similar legislation in the House. Now, Mr. President, as we near this one-year anniversary of the disaster, first we need to remember the victims, the human victims. 11 people lost their lives and their families. Those families still have a huge hole in their lives, and we need to continue to remember them and pray for them. But we also need to help restore the affected area. A lot of other lives were impacted through the environmental and the economic devastation, and we need to work on that as well. This Restore the Gulf Coast Act of 2011 would go a long way in restoring those lives, in healing those impacts. This was a horrible tragedy, and of course, the physical, the environmental damage was borne by these 5 Gulf Coast states. So therefore, we think it is more than fair that 80% of the fines directly related to this event, which would not have been incurred, would not be in existence but for this tragedy, be dedicated to restoration along the Gulf Coast. Senator Landrieu, with my support and others, have worked out a very fair formula to impact all of the Gulf Coast states in a positive way. We think it's more than fair because it assures some minimum funding to all of the affected states, and then has another pot of money that is specifically focused on direct impacts. And we think this is a very fair way to go about it that also dovetails with the work that's been going on in the states and federally through the President's Commission on Impacts. And so we think this would be an excellent way to approach it. And it is more than fair to the federal government and to the federal taxpayer, because the money retained that's still flowing to the federal treasury more than covers all expenses of the federal government related to this event. Goes well beyond those direct expenses. So again, Mr. President, I thank my colleague for her leadership, and I ask all of our colleagues to come together around this effort. This concept has been explicitly endorsed by President Obama. This concept has been explicitly endorsed by the President's Commission in the oil spill. All of those folks have absolutely said, yes, 80% of these Clean Water Act fines need to stay on the Gulf Coast for much-needed restoration. This legislation will get that done in a fair, straightforward way. I urge all of my colleagues to support it and help pass it in the next few weeks and months. Thank you, Mr. President. With that, I turn